Hello there, fifth graders. I'm wearing a mask in today's lesson because I noticed a big, giant, glaring mistake in the video, in the pre-recorded video I made for today's lesson at first. And so now I'm redoing it with the entire Tuesday, Thursday cohort here. And I'm teaching them the lesson as I'm making the lesson for the video. This is the first time I've ever had to do this. So go ahead and open up your math notebook to your next available page. That applies to you guys too, and it applies to you guys too. And go ahead at the top of that page, write the title for today's lesson, which is Add Unlike Fractions. Add unlike fractions. Now, when you add unlike fractions, you have to follow three simple steps. Step one is find common denominators. So basically that means the first step towards adding unlike fractions is making them like fractions. You have to make the fractions like, give them the same denominator before you can add them together. Step two is add the numerators. So you add the numerators together and keep the denominator the same. Okay, there's only one more step. Step one is find common denominators. So the unlike fractions that you start with, you have to make them like fractions. Step two is just like in yesterday's lesson and the lesson for the day before, you add or subtract, in this case add, you add the numerators, but you keep the denominator the same. Whatever the denominator is in both add-ins, that's what it ends up being in the sum. You don't add the denominators together. And step three is you simplify. Sometimes that means reducing a fraction by finding the greatest common denominator and dividing the numerator and denominator by that GCF. Or sometimes it means changing an improper fraction into a mixed number or a whole number. Let's do an example together. Let's say we have 1/3 plus 1/5. Notice I stacked the fractions on top of each other. And that's the best way to solve a problem with fractions when you have different denominators, because in step one, you're going to have to find common denominators. So you're going to have to make equivalent fractions. And the easiest way to do it is to make them next to these. So there's going to be a fraction right here and a fraction right here. This one is going to be equivalent to 1/3. This one is going to be equivalent to 1/5, but they're going to have the same denominator. So that's going to make it so I can add them together. Now, how do I find that common denominator? That's step one, find common denominators. The way I find it is by listing the multiples for 3 and 5 until I find a number that's in both lists. So I'm going to put 3 here and 5 here, and I'm going to count by 3s, and I'm going to count by 5s until I find a number that's in both lists. So 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. I counted by 3s until I got to 15. And since I know 15 is also a multiple of 5, I'm going to stop right there. And now I'm going to count by 5s. 5, 10, 15. And 15 is the first number I got to that's in both lists. So it's the LCM. And I'm going to use it as my new common denominator. Okay. Now I need to find out what my new numerators will be in these two equivalent fractions. And I do that by multiplying from my old denominator to my new denominator. And then whatever I do to the bottom, I do to the top. So 5 times 3 is 15. 1 times 3 is 3. 3 times 5 is 15. 1 times 5 is 5. So now I have, instead of 1/3 minus 1/5, I have 5/15 minus 3/15. Plus. Instead of 1/3 plus 1/5, I have 5/13 plus 3/15. Did I say that wrong again? Now, instead of 1/3 plus 1/5, I have 5/15 plus 3/15. But 5/15 is equivalent to 1/3, and 3/15 is equivalent to 1/5. So now I add these two together. 5 plus 3 is 8, and the denominator 15 stays the same. Step 3 is simplify. So I think do 8. Now, 8 is not bigger than 15, so it's not an improper fraction, but 8 and 15 might have common factors greater than 1. So I think, what are my factors of 8? My factors of 8 are 1, 2, 4, and 8. I'll move my face so that you can see what I'm doing here. And my factors of 15 are 1, 3, 5, and 15. And since there's no common factor in both lists greater than 1, that means 8/15 is already in simplest form. Let's do another example together. Now, once I scroll down, you won't be able to see these 3 steps anymore, but hopefully you wrote them on your own paper, so you'll be able to see them there. Okay, let's do 1/2 plus 1/5. Okay, the first step is find common denominators. And I do that by listing the multiples for both 2 and 5 until I find a number that's in both lists. So I put 2 here, I put 5 here, and I'm going to count by 2s and count by 5s until I get a number that's in both lists. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. I'm going to stop right there because I know 10 is a multiple of 5. 5, 10. Since 10 is the first number I reached, but when counting by 2s and counting by 5s that's in both lists, that means 10 is the least common multiple. And I'm going to use 10 as my new least common denominator. I'm going to use it as my denominator when making equivalent fractions for both 1/2 and 1/5. This fraction is going to be equivalent to 1/5, but it's going to have 10 as its denominator. This fraction is going to be equivalent to 1/2, but it's also going to have 10 as its denominator. That's going to make these like fractions, and it's going to make it so I can add them together. So how do I find my new numerators? I multiply from my old denominator to my new denominator. 5 times 2 is 10. And then whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. 1 times 2 is 2. And I do that same thing here. 2 times 5 is 10. Whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. 1 times 5 is 5. Okay. Now I'm adding 5/10 to 1/10. But it's the same addition problem because 5/10 is equivalent to 1/2 and 2/10 is equivalent to 1/5. And step 2 is add the numerators and leave the denominator the same. 5 plus 2 is 7. The denominator 10 stays the same. And step 3 is simplify. 7 is not bigger than 10, so I don't need to change it into a mixed or whole number. And 7 and 10 won't have any common factors because 7 is a prime number, so it only has 2 factors, 1 in itself, and 7 can't fit evenly into 10. So I know it's already in simplest form. I'm going to turn my paper over now and do another example with you. Let's do 5/12 plus 1/4. So my first step is find common denominators. Make the denominators the same. So I take my 2 denominators, 4 and 12, and I find the LCM, the least common multiple. And all I have to do is count by 4s and count by 12s until I find a number that's in both lists. 4, 8, 12. If when counting by the first number, you reach the second number, see, I just got to 12 and my second number is 12, I know I'm done because that'll be my first multiple of 12. So 12 is my LCM. And notice it's already the denominator of one of my fractions. So I don't need to change 5/12. It already has 12 as its denominator. but I will change 1/4 into an equivalent fraction that also has 12 as its denominator. Now I'm going to multiply from my old denominator to my new denominator. 4 times 3 equals 12. Whatever I do to the bottom, I do to the top. 1 times 3 equals 3. Okay? Now, instead of adding 5/12 to 1/4, which I can't do because they have different denominators, I'm adding 5/12 to 3/12. But since 3/12 is equivalent to 1/4, it means the same thing. 5 plus 3 is 8, and my denominator 12 stays the same. Now, step 3 is simplify. 8 is not bigger than 12, so it's not an improper fraction, but will 8 and 12 have common factors greater than 1? Well, let's find out. If I list my factors of 8, they're 1, 2, 4, and 8. Let me move myself so you can see. And if I list my factors of 12, they're 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 12. And as you can see, 4 is the GCF. And what do I do with that GCF? I divide my numerator and denominator by the GCF. So 8 divided by 4 is 2. 12 divided by 4 is 3. So the final answer is 2/3. All right, I've done 3 examples with you now. All you have to do is follow those 3 steps of find common denominators. That means make the fractions like fractions. Then add the numerators and keep the denominator the same. Then simplify. I'm going to write down a couple for you to do independently now. And then I'll have you click on the video attached under this one to see if you did them correctly. So go ahead and do 2/3 plus 1/6. And then also do 1/2 plus 1/4. Go ahead and solve, Go ahead and solve both of those following the 3 steps. And then again, click on the video under this one to see if you did them correctly. I will see you there. Signing off.